Hey guys, welcome to Flex Performance Training. Today I want to talk about your front rack and how we can improve it and if it really is that necessary to improve it for certain populations. Now, some people use front racks or the front rack to front squat and that's all they use it for. They don't use it for any power cleans or any other power variation from the weightlifting variations. I think I said variations 3 times there. But if that's the case, then I'd probably recommend that you don't need to really increase your front rack or spend a considerable amount of time improving that position, because there are ways that we can get around that, and there are different methods or bars we can use to get the same effect without really spending time banging away at a mobility restriction in inverted commas. You don't really need to. So a lot of the time, generally that mobility restriction will be there, especially for contact athletes like rugby union, rugby league, where you've probably got very tight shoulders for the amount of contacts and tackling that you've had. So actually increasing that mobility might not be the greatest thing, as that's acting in some protective mechanism to keep your shoulders nice and tight. I'm not saying being tight's the answer. I'm just saying that maybe we don't need to look at that as a big priority or a big rock of your training. However, for athletes who do have the ability and do find a lot of benefit from movement such as power cleans, or even muscle cleans for that extent, and even to a great degree, overhead pressing with a barbell overhead, having a good front rack is pretty essential to reduce the likelihood of injury and to increase your efficiency overhead. So a lot of the time when people do have a front rack, the big problem will be they won't be able to actually sit the bar onto their shoulders like so, and they'll have some imbalances. And now what I want to go through first and foremost is why that tends to occur. So in a front rack, what you'll see is people will try and keep their thoracic spine nice and upright and extended. And what that's going to really restrict is that forward motion of the scapula. And that forward motion is what really allows us to create a nice shelf across the top. Whereas if we try and get some rounding of that thoracic part, which is pretty much from here to about here in our back, and below that's the lumbar and above that cervical, we can allow for that forward protraction so our shoulders can come forward, and we can create a nice shelf pretty much across the front here with a bar will rest on our clavicle and on the front of our delts, and that'll keep the bar off our carotid artery. And that's where we sort of see when the bar drops back onto that artery, we see athletes, for example, in weightlifting, where they'll hit a clean and they'll stand up and then they'll just sort of pass out afterwards because there's no blood flow going through to the brain. So we want to keep our shoulders as far forward as we can and then come into some external rotation like so we can actually create a shelf across the front. So there's a few things that we can look at from breaking that down. The first one is, how good is our protraction of our shoulder blade? How good is that movement that we've got? And if we don't have that, then we can start to look at ways to improve the function of serratus anterior, which is one of the main muscles in protraction. The other thing that we can look at as well is, are there mobility restrictions around the shoulder which are restricting that sort of external rotation, because we're coming from here and we're externally rotating the humerus in the shoulder joint, and then we need some external rotation as well of the radiofibular joint. Radius-ulnar joint. Radio-ulnar joint, not fibula. Fibula's down there in your leg. Always getting confused. But there's a few things that we can look at. So with all that in mind, how can we actually improve that? So we're going to grab some bands and we're going to go through some simple activation work. So when we look at the serratus anterior first and foremost, like I said, that does protraction. So we can do something quite simple, having a band around a rig like so, setting up in this position here, and then we can focus on just driving that shoulder forward and back. And we can practice that overhead as well. We can set there, drive up and back down, so we can focus on keeping a strong shoulder position through that range. And we can actually start to improve that position and get that scapula coming forward. So that's quite a simple one if we know that the problem is with our ability to create that position there. And even lower level drill could be on our hands and knees and simply trying to breathe through and compress ourselves anteriorly so that we can expand posteriorly and breathe into that section pretty much in between your shoulder blades and try and get some more movement there. So if we want to be more targeted approach, and we know that it's a tricep lat problem, then we can start to look at things like heavy band stretches before we go into the actual drill. Now, I'm going to preface this with saying that if you do these drills, you need to follow it up and load that position immediately. Because if you don't load that position almost immediately, then that acute change in range of motion that you've just achieved through some static stretching or some drills, the likelihood of that hanging around is much, much lower. So what we can do with a big red band, we can actually loop that under our heel and then we can stand on it. Put our hand through it and then we can come up into this position here and we can actually start to breathe. So the big thing that people will do here is they'll just drop forward and hang out like that, which is something that I've been guilty of myself. What we need to do is think about tucking the hips under and then with our rib cage, actually pulling that down as tight as we can and then slowly trying to push that elbow up towards the sky and not rotating or swinging forward. Find something that's straight in front of you and try and keep everything aligned so that you can slowly improve that position and as we go through. Now, what that will do is you'll find is that as you can, if you've done some pre-work with your serratus anterior, you can start to get a little bit more forward motion of that shoulder blade so that elbow will start to raise up a little bit more. So that's one thing we can do. There's another one that we can do which is a little bit more tricky. And it does require a dowel and a bench. All right. And now this one might not be as good as we once thought. And I've done a video on this one before as well, where we looked at, I did it a while ago and I'm going to go through it quickly again. You may not be in the best angle there. I might have to move you to get there. But essentially what we're going to do, we're going to have our hands in an undergrasp grip on a dowel. A barbell will be too heavy. And we're going to drive our elbows forward and try and force our shoulders into shoulder blades into some protraction and elevation, or upward rotation, sorry. So we're going to set up on a bench like so, as best we can. And again, we don't just want to dump into that position. All right, so now we're in a better position. I'm going to have to move the camera back to go back to there before, but hands are roughly just shoulder width apart. We're going to drive our elbows onto that bench, sit back, and what a lot of people will do is they'll tend to just drop that tension and just hang out through their spine. What I want you to do, however, is be smart about it and pull your hips under, tuck your chin into a neutral position, and try and slowly push yourself into position. And right there, you'll start to feel some tension. The temptation will be to get your chest further down and just to drop through. But you'll lose tension completely and it'll be almost a pointless stretch. So you're going to keep everything nice and aligned, hips under, abs on, driving your elbows forward and slowly coming down into that position, trying to keep your elbows through and almost pulling yourself down and away from the bench. You can rotate your arms back and forth, which will change it a little bit. But realistically, you want to keep a nice tucked position in your midline so that you can actually hold that position a whole lot better. So you can actually feel it and let it go. And then the same thing applies to this as it did to the banded stretch, where you're going to have to get under a barbell again. And the big thing that I'm going to say here to caveat all this is all well and good, but unless you spend time under a barbell actually going through and improving your front rack with a bar in your hand, then the chances of it improving are pretty slim, if none. So let's get back to that quickly. So there's something that I did see that was this is a while ago now, sort of in the very first stages when people were putting information online, was from Quinn Henoch. And if you haven't seen him, he's one of the guys who looks at the clinical athlete and has a wealth of information. He's a very, very intelligent human being. And I recommend going across to his channel and checking him out. But when he looked at this initially, one of the drills he uses is getting your hands in the appropriate position on the barbell. And from there, actually spending time coming under the bar, getting it secure, driving your elbows forward, getting into a good position, and slowly coming up into that bar and almost squatting yourself up into the right position without letting the bar come off. And so you can do this from enough, put load on the bar, enough load that isn't going to allow you to move it when you push up into it. You can sit into that position, get in, and have that correct position of your hips under your shoulders, elbows forward, and drive up nice and slow until you find that point where it starts to hurt or it starts to be uncomfortable, and spend time there and breathe. We know that from Gray Cook, one of the things he stated in the FMS was that if we can't breathe in a position, we can't own it. And if we can't breathe in a front rack and we're a weightlifter or we're using the clean movements to develop power, then we're not going to be as efficient and our body's going to create systems to try and avoid that. because the body is very intelligent. And if it knows that a position is hard to get into or it hurts, then it's going to find compensatory patterns to not get into that position in the first place. So we need to make those positions or those actions very smooth, or those positions comfortable to get into, so that our body isn't trying to fight to get away from it. And an example of that, just for context, we know when we're injured and say we've got a sore knee or a sore ankle, we're going to limp to not put as much load on that body to avoid exacerbating the injury. The exact same thing is true with your positions. So the same can be applied to an overhead squat. If you're not comfortable in your overhead squat, then your body's going to avoid going there. It's going to be much, much harder to get into a deep overhead position. So be all and end all. So I want to wrap all this up. Use these movements sparingly and use them in between your working sets to actually increase that position. Breathe, go through it. Sweet. Have a quick rest, get a drink of water, back under the bar so you can load it and focus on where that position is. And as a bonus as well, what I'm going to add in as well is, if we actually look at the Zercher squat, it's a really good drill to actually help us think about pushing our shoulders forward and relaxing them as well, which gets us into that sort of flex or kyphotic position, which, funnily enough, is how our thoracic spine is designed to work. It's not designed to be an extension. That's what your lumbar spine is supposed to do. Our upper back or our thoracic spine is designed to actually be rounded. If you look at any sort of structural books or your diagrams of models of anatomy, the thoracic spine has a natural kyphotic curve. The lumbar spine has a natural lordotic curve. Okay, so let's utilize those positions because that's how the spine was designed to take load. All right, so the Zercher squat can be really good for that position to drive forward, and it can help get us into some flexion, which, funnily enough, is actually very, very good for some variation for weightlifters as well. So that could be something that you can look at even as an accessory, doing some unilateral work. So weightlifters do we should be doing, and if you're not doing it, start doing it now, unilateral work. And that can be just in the shape of 2 to 3 or 6 sets maybe. So 2 to 3 times a week of some lunge work or some RDL work, all right? Probably trying to keep them relatively balanced. All right, and that can be in the shape of doing some Zercher squats some Zercher split squats, okay? And that can be very, very beneficial in the long run, adding some variation and keeping some spice in your programming rather than just doing the same drills over and over again. Anyway, guys, hope this has helped on the front rack. Let us know if it has. Comment below, like and subscribe, all that lame social media stuff. Do what you want. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Just subscribe, don't like, don't comment. Comment, up to you. If it has helped, I'd appreciate it. If not, leave a comment as to why it could be better. Again, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.